I don't think you're going to be on film and right there. I guess they don't have a KGB anymore here, so. Let me just ask you. Nobody's taking names, but how many people think, yes, you switched the track? Okay, thank you. You're pretty sure of that. And how many would say, definitely don't switch the track? That's pretty interesting. I think there aren't 5 times as many people who would say switch the track. There's a majority who would say switch the track, but not a large majority. So a lot of you would say switch the track. A lot of you would say don't switch the track.
But still, a lot more people didn't make the choice at all.
A lot more people. How many people didn't make a choice at all? Like, get some practice. Put your hand up there. How many people didn't make a choice? That should add up to a very large number once you have those 3 categories. Okay. Anybody? Yeah, all right. Anybody want to change their vote? All right. I will tell you the most interesting thing that ever happened to me giving a lecture. It wasn't a big lecture like this. It was a smaller group. I was talking to a group of 21 professors, philosophy professors from post-Soviet republics. And they were from 9 countries, I think. And I presented this, and I said, what do you think? Should you switch the track? Show of hands. No hand. Should you switch? Should you not switch? And they said, time out. We need to talk. I had said, look, and we didn't have simultaneous translation or anything like that, so I said, look, if you guys need to talk about what I said, so you need to maybe translate, somebody has a question, what did that word mean? So if you ever want to call a timeout to talk, just do it, I don't mind. So I said, which is it? Switch or not? They said timeout. They talked about it among themselves in Russian for a few minutes, and then they got back to me, and this was the thing that one of them said, Russian, incidentally, and he said, oh yes, we've heard this before. Actually, we've heard this all our lives. We've been told all our lives that we have to sacrifice the few for the sake of the many. We were told all our lives that there's no other way. And what we were told was a lie. There was always another way. So I canceled the rest of the class. I said, I don't have anything else to say. That is just something that we all should think about. Justice. What is justice? Justice is about respecting the separateness of persons. When you're called upon to sacrifice the few for the sake of the many, justice is about finding another way. Practicality, realism, justice, morality, they're all about finding another way. Now I'm curious, I want to take another vote. Still 5-1. But my question for you in part is this a different question? You're a surgeon in a hospital, and you have 5 patients on operating tables about to die because of a lack of suitable organ donors. And then the mailman comes in. I carried mail for 5 years. I like to talk about the mailman. Before I went to college, I carried mail. So the mailman comes in and says, special delivery, and maybe the mailman is one of your patients. I don't know, but you look at the mailman and you say, oh, histocompatible blood type. It's all good. It's like, this is a suitable donor, healthy, suitable donor for all of my 5 patients. I can save all 5 of my patients with the mailman. So do you do that? You have a chance to, you've heard me ask this before, you have a chance to kill one person so that you can save 5 people. So now I want to ask you, should you kill one person to save 5 people if you're that surgeon? How many people say, yes, you should kill that mailman? Now I said I'm a mailman in my previous life. Don't let that influence you. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to make it overly personal. So how many, if you want to make me feel bad, say, well, if it's a mailman, yeah, well, sure. So how many people say, sacrifice the mailman? All right. How many people say, no, don't sacrifice the mailman? All right. Thank you. And so for the third category, how many people didn't put up their hands? You really give an honest answer when you say how many people didn't put up their hands. Okay, well, some people didn't put up their hands. Okay. Very different numbers. Probably 20 times as many people said no, if you're the surgeon, you don't kill the mailman. Almost all the hands were in support of not doing the switch, not killing the one person. Same problem, right? Or at least I'm saying, like a utilitarian, there's 2 things here that matter. There's 5 and there's 1. And those 2 things that matter, they're exactly the same in both cases. You can't get different answers. Or, if you do get a different answer, it's because sometimes the numbers aren't the only things that count. So what else would count, if not the numbers? Now, I want to say that if you think something else counts beside the numbers, that probably means you're not a utilitarian. That's kind of what utilitarianism is. It's to say ethics is all about the numbers. Utilitarians are trying to be ethical, they're trying to be practical. And that's not true. That's not the right way to think of utilitarianism. Even from a utilitarian perspective, sometimes the numbers don't count. Sometimes something else counts. And the other thing that counts for a lot, maybe way more than the numbers count, is something that's very much on the surface in the hospital case, but not in the trolley case. So let's talk about that for a second. If you are organizing a society and you're developing a legal system for a society, one thing that you might do is you might say, murder, really bad consequence. We do not want people being murdered in our society. Anyone ever lived in a society where murdering people is frowned upon? I bet you have. Okay, so this is the thing. Do you want your legal system to minimize the number of murders? How many people think, yeah, you want your legal system to minimize the number of murders? This is not a hard question. Yeah, of course you want your society to minimize the number of murders. But you might be thinking, some of you, the hands that didn't go up, you might be thinking, that was a trick question. It isn't a trick question. But here's the thing. If you say, okay, first thing, just stop the most awful forms of violence. Just stop the murder. So let's pass a law requiring all of us, requiring people to minimize the number of murders. Do you know how many societies have passed laws requiring ordinary citizens to minimize the number of murders? The next society that does that will be the first. And yet, who doesn't want to minimize the number of murders? Of course you want to minimize the number of murders. Of course you think that's really part of the point of having a system of law, maybe a constitution, maybe a sheriff, police force, something. That's why you have a legal system. Partly, one of the main things is to minimize the number of murders. So why don't you pass a law requiring people to minimize the number of murders? Or requiring surgeons to minimize the number of people who die? Well, because that wouldn't work. Well, because there's a better alternative. If you're a system of law, or you're creating a system of law, how do you minimize the number of murders? You make murder illegal. You recognize the fact that the point of the law isn't to tell people what their goal is. The point is to say, here's a line, here's a constraint, treat it with respect. And this is a line around your neighbors, by the way, around your neighbors' property and their bodies, to say, don't cross that line. Treat that line with respect. Treat people with respect. That's what you require of citizens. The law promotes the good by requiring citizens to respect the good. Not requiring citizens to maximize the good, requiring citizens to respect it. That's all. That's what we do if you're a system of law. You don't try to do everything. That's interesting, I think. The law, a good law, doesn't try to do everything worth doing. So the institutions that actually work are institutions that don't try to do everything. So the answer to the question is to, like, do you switch or don't you switch? It isn't really about 1 versus 5. The thing that makes society good for us, why it's good to live in a society, why it's good to be, if you're going to be this biologically frail, it's good to be a political animal, it's good to be a social animal, it's good to live in a community, it's good to have neighbors, it's good to be surrounded by family and friends and people you trust. That's the magic word, isn't it? Society has its utility because of one thing, trust. Trust is the secret to everything. Hospitals can't save patients unless patients can trust hospitals to treat patients with respect. Or mailman, I guess. So what's the first thing that happens if you use the mailman for spare parts for organ donors, right? At some point, well, the post office I worked for was a Canadian post office, and it was kind of a government operation, so maybe it wouldn't be like that. But if you imagine a private delivery company, if it was in United Postal Service, I don't know what you have here, FedEx, DHL, you have delivery companies like that. If you're a delivery company and your delivery person doesn't come back from the hospital, you give a call and you say, so what happened? Did you see our delivery person? And at some point, the word goes out. Don't ever deliver a package to the hospital. Don't go near the hospital. If you're healthy, don't go near the hospital. You have a terrible headache, you go in to see the doctor says, you're perfectly healthy, and you say, I'm perfectly healthy? Well, how long have I got then? Right? That's no way to run a business, it's no way to run a hospital, it's no way to run society, it's no way to run morality. Morality doesn't work like that. It's not about the numbers, it's based on trust. It's based on building trust. It's based on making a hospital a place where you can count on being treated as if you have rights. Okay. So, and the society as a whole is like that too. What makes a society the kind of place you want to live in? It's a place where people get treated, people like you get treated as if they have rights. So, let me find something else here. Okay, so I wanted to get a picture of traffic lights, of red and green lights. So I Googled it. I Googled, what do you think? I Googled Moscow red light. Now, how many of you can imagine what it was that I found when I Googled Moscow red light? You can't win. Life just isn't fair sometimes. Because someday, somehow, my wife is going to find out that when I was in Moscow, I went looking for the red light district. She's a computer wizard. She's going to find it. But anyway, I didn't want to mess with that anymore, so I just, got out my phone and I went outside and I took this photograph. So this is a photograph. It's a snapshot Can I call it a snapshot? And I want to say there is a fundamental error in our thinking about morality. A deep, it's subtle, but fundamental error in the way we think about morality and in the way that we think about justice. So it's like this. If you take a snapshot of society and you say, let's look at the economy as one very large pie. So then what's the question of justice? The question of justice would be, how are we going to divide the pie? So what do you think? What's the proposal? What's a fair way to divide the pie? This is not a hard question either. If people are equal, or anyway, people have equal rights, then they should have equal shares. We should divide the pie into equal shares. You take a snapshot, it's pretty hard not to be looking at justice from an egalitarian perspective. And if you do that, you're missing the one truly fundamental fact about human society, which is that it's in motion. It isn't a snapshot. Okay. Equality looks fine as a principle of justice for snapshots. But if the snapshot is a representation of something that is in motion, inherently in motion, it has a history. That is a pie that came from somewhere. It's only there because somebody brought it to the table for reasons of their own. Somebody worked to produce it, somebody invented it, whatever. Somebody built it, and it's going somewhere too. They built it for a customer. That's not accurately represented by the snapshot. The snapshot will be completely misleading. All of the thought experiments we do that culminate in egalitarian principles that lead us saying, well, it's wonderful, it's beautiful in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. Well, it doesn't really work in theory either, unless your theory is a theory about a theory about a representation, a theory about a snapshot. If you're actually trying to be fair to people, and you say, you get an equal share, and you say, I'm sorry, it's my pie. I brought the pie. What do you mean I get an equal share? I mean, I decide how to divide the pie. You don't allocate an equal slice to me. You say, well, maybe that person is wrong. But you don't prove that that person is wrong by saying, look at the snapshot. It's obvious you get an equal share. That's not the way to do it. That's not the way to run a society. That's not practical. But I want to say, it's not because it's beautiful in theory but doesn't work in practice. It's just a really bad theory. It's a really misleading theory. So, there is an equality that matters. We are equals in a sense. We do have equal rights in a sense. But snapshot equality isn't the equality that matters. It's not important that everyone have opportunity at the same time. It's just important that everyone have an opportunity. If you're an egalitarian, you believe everybody should have a shot at picking a destination of their own, living a life of their own choosing according to their own plan, as long as they live it peacefully. That is the kind of equality that makes people a society, that makes them good for each other, that makes them be able to afford to trust each other, that makes them not a threat to each other. So, this is a snapshot. So if you say, but what would equality be in this snapshot? You say, look, forgive me like that, it's not a great photograph, but you could say, look at all those people. They've got green lights, the haves have green lights, the have-nots have red lights. That's not fair. Those people just get to go, and those people have to sit there and wait. That's not fair. Everybody should have a green light at the same time. And if you think about the fact that this is a plan for governing motion, those red lights, are a plan for, they're an idea about how to manage traffic. And they're a coordination or a spontaneous mutual understanding. People, like, it's actually kind of amazing how quickly it works. People, from the time they're very young, like probably about the time they learn how to read, I don't know, but very early in life, you get that red means stop and green means go. People just figure that out and they look at each other. So sometimes, I don't know if your society is anything like mine, right? You have, is this on? Right? If you come up to an intersection and there's the person coming down like and going like this, right? And you say, that person's not going to stop. Like, is it illegal to text and drive here? Where I come from, it's illegal to text and drive, but you have to watch because people are addicted to it. It's like gambling or alcohol or something. They can't stop texting, and they're driving and texting, and they're dangerous. So there's lots of people who don't stop at red lights anymore. But basically, the convention did evolve anyway. It may be breaking down now, but the convention did evolve. Everybody knows I can look you in the eye, and you look me back, and that means we both know that whichever one of us has the green light gets to keep going, whichever one of us has the red light has to stop. It's not about being equal at a moment. It's about everybody understanding that everybody gets to take their turn sooner or later. So everybody should have an opportunity. But that's not the same as saying a 20-year-old's job prospects should be the same as a 40-year-old's job prospects. That's just not true. There's no reason why that should be true. It's going to take 20 years for that 20-year-old to develop a skill set that the 40-year-old has now. That's not unfair. It's fine. Not a problem. It's not even unequal, really. It's not unequal when you think about the fact that that society is in motion and a person's income is sort of arcing like that over the course of a lifetime. It's not like that. It's like that. From the perspective. So I want to talk about theorizing a bit more then, but theorizing for a reason. Theorizing for a world that's in motion. So for moral theory to actually be about something real, about something that realists have reason to care about, it doesn't have to be a photograph. It's probably better if it isn't a photograph. Right? It can be like a map of the Moscow underground, and that might be much less misleading than something that spuriously looks more realistic. Because that map of the underground, it gets to the logic, the essential logic that we need to know if you're going to have a compass, if you're going to get guidance, if you're going to know what to watch out for. So let's say that realism studies the human condition as it is, whereas idealism studies the human condition as it could be. Well, so realism and idealism, those are two different things, but they're not incompatible. So one of the possible forms of idealism, you can call it realistic idealism if you like, that studies what's actually worth aiming for within the current constraints. It's what's worthy of aspiration in light of a sober assessment of what the possibilities are and what the real problems are here and now. So you say if we've got a cure for malaria, that's a different world, that's a different problem than if we don't yet have a cure for it. And that could change what the right thing to do with our resources would be. So one of the, you heard this, it's not meant as an insult, one of the fundamental features of the human condition is that we are, after all, political animals, as they say. So what does that mean? It means, one, we are decision makers. Two, we're decision makers who want and need to live together. The third thing is that, well, as decision makers, as intelligent decision makers responsive to circumstances, we do respond to circumstances, including the circumstance that we live among other decision makers. That's interesting. We live among beings who, like a utilitarian would say, they're capable of feeling pleasure and pain. That's fine. That's important. That's an important fact about them. But they're also capable of making decisions. That's a separate issue. That's really important. We're dealing with people. We're making choices that affect people who can respond to us, who can adjust their strategies in response to what they see us doing. That's really important. So, the Scottish Enlightenment theorists, David Hume and Adam Smith, they focused on the nature and the source of the wealth of nations, the prosperity of them, human flourishing. They cared enough about consequences. They actually study what has a history of working. Philosophers don't do that anymore. We split into social sciences. We don't do history anymore. We don't do sociology. We don't do anthropology. We don't even do history. It's crazy, but yeah, we're over-specialized. I'm sorry about that. I'd like to do something about it. Philosophy is, in some sense, the fundamental discipline, but it's not the place to start. You want to start with history. Ask yourself, what is a history of work? So you observe, the Scottish Enlightenment theorists observed, Adam Smith observed, that when you look around and ask which societies are getting rich, which societies are really advancing human knowledge and human capability, well, those are the societies where people are traders, they're building trading relationships around principles of reciprocity. They're building stuff together, they're cooperating. So the Scottish Enlightenment theorists, they care that in our world, it's complicated. Actions have more than one consequence. Actions have more than the consequence you intend, and the consequence you don't intend is going to come back and matter someday. It's going to come back to haunt you. The consequence you don't see coming, it will matter. So the kind of act utilitarianism that we see today, just minimize pain, maximize pleasure. That's missing something. So I would say my criticism of the kind of act utilitarianism we see today, the kind of thing you might say, well, it's great in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. I don't think it's great in theory because I think it doesn't actually pay attention to what has any history of robustly good consequences. So what we call utilitarianism today is useless. And it's not because it's obsessed with consequences, it's because it largely ignores them. So if you think about this, what I said about strategy, think about chess. So I'm thinking about chess, I'm looking at an early move in the game, and I'm thinking, what would be the ideal place for my king's pawn to be? And I say, well, the ideal place would be for my king's pawn to be at k4. So I move my king's pawn to k4. And then I say, wow, this is ideal. This is so good. Well, if I fail to anticipate my partner's response, right, you just walk right into the other player's knight or whatever. If I fail to anticipate my partner's response, then my so-called imagination, what a beautiful world it would be if my pawn was at k4. My imagination, my creativity, it's exactly what chess players would call a failure of imagination. Because that's really stupid. You've got to see that consequence coming. You've got to see the trap that you're walking into. You know what? It takes imagination to be a realist. It takes imagination to be practical. The player who anticipates what can go wrong, that's the one whose imagination real chess players are going to admire. Right? And that's what a realistic utilitarianism would be, right? You live in a world of players. Don't try to maximize their pleasure. You're not working on their payoff. You're working on their strategy. if you really care about consequences, work on their strategy. Don't make them happy, make them reciprocate. That's what will turn your society into something rich. So the key to morality won't be found in a jingle or even a professional code of ethics, right? You say, like in my students in the business school anyway, they say, give me the code, give me the list of commandments. I want to know the things that I follow so that I don't get in trouble or don't get caught or something like that. And it's just more complicated. Even if we give you a code, we say, that's a little bit like looking at that map of the Moscow underground when you're really looking for is directions to the cafe. Like, you need to pay attention to detail. All right? So, you might come to chess, the game of chess, saying, can somebody please give me the formula for winning? Can somebody give me the algorithm, the recipe, so that all I need to do is follow the rules and I'm guaranteed to win? That's what people think morality would be. And there's no such algorithm, there's no such recipe in chess, and morality is way more complicated than chess. It's not even close. Right? In chess, there are grandmasters. There are people who just see beyond what I can see. People who see beyond what regular people can see. And so you say, what's the point of being a chess grandmaster? Well, I don't know, but I know this. Not being able to see the point of being a grandmaster is not a sign of intelligence. Not being able to see the point of being morally admirable is not a sign of intelligence. It's not a sign of practicality. Are there grandmasters of morality? Are there people who are just better? I suppose, probably. I'm not sure. But maybe no one does morality at the grandmaster level, because it really is pretty complicated. But failing to see the point of being moral, well, that's maybe sort of like failing to see the point of chess. Once you're in the game, you get it. And if you're not in the game, maybe you don't get it. But not being in the game isn't impressive. It doesn't make you admirable. So the cannibals laugh because they don't see the point of respecting food, whatever. And they're frightening, but there's nothing there to admire. So the test of a code, a real code, a serious principles, a set of principles, it isn't that it answers all questions, but it helps us decide what questions to ask. It helps us to see when not to settle for an easy answer and when not to settle for social pressure. Because that's the death of us all. It's not greed isn't what, the thing that kills most people, it isn't greed, it's social pressure. It's looking around to see what other people expect of you when they're not expecting what they should be. So moral philosophy, does it help? Does it help you prepare for the test? I would say yes. I hope so. I get paid a lot of money for teaching moral philosophy, so I hope I'm worth it. But what I would say is moral philosophy prepares us not by giving us answers, but by warning us that the test has begun. Okay? So real morality is not suicidal, it's not a sacrifice, it's about self-respect. Adam Smith understood this. Adam Smith looked around England in the late 1700s, and he saw what people are after. And it was like, yeah, trinkets, not really, not so much. What they're really after is esteem. They want to be admired by other people. This is the deep motivation that Adam Smith noticed. And we're human, and we're social animals, we're political animals. We cannot help but care about whether the people around us admire us. We can say, no, I'm practical, I don't care about that. This is just not true. Everybody cares. Everybody cares about whether they're admirable or whether they're admired. And that's important, but actually it's not the biggest prize. The bigger prize is people admiring us for the right reasons, and for us to know they're admiring us for the right reasons. To say, okay, I put on my false facade, I put on my facade, and people admired the facade. People admired my disguise, that's cool. But much cooler if they admire the real thing. If you can say, they understood me, and they liked what they saw. It doesn't get much cooler than that. It doesn't get much better than that. So the bigger prize is other people admiring us for the right reasons, for their admiration, not to be a case of mistaken identity. Really seeing who we are and liking what they see. It's not a case of our being able to fool them. It's a case of not needing to fool them. They look at us. They see who they are, who we are. They still like us. And actually, there's something even more important than that. That's still not the biggest prize. The most important thing is looking in the mirror and knowing we have nothing to hide. Even if people don't like us, even if people do criticize us, even if people misjudge us and see the wrong thing and hate us, but looking in the mirror and knowing, I mean, that hurts. It hurts. It definitely hurts. But going to bed at night knowing you've got nothing to hide, knowing that you're innocent, there isn't any substitute with that. When we can be honest with other people, and above all, when we can be honest with ourselves, no story, no excuse, no need to pretend to be something we aren't. That's the kind of life that's ultimately worth wanting. Anybody who has a half of an intelligent, practical bone in their body understands that is, if there's anything that's worth dying for, that would be it. If there's anything worth living for, probably lots of things worth living for, but nothing more than that. That's the realistic ideal. Someday we will look back on our lives knowing we're near the end. And this is the thing that we will want to be able to say at the end. It was good I was here. My world was better off with me than without me. I showed up, I made a difference, and the difference was something to be proud of. So that's my biggest challenge. That's why I'm here tonight. I guess you too, your biggest challenge. That's what it's like to be human. And so I'm talking about morality, and as far as I know, I'm simply being realistic. Thank you. I'll stop for questions.
Вы слышите? Понимаете меня? Спасибо. Я не считал, что у нас не будет проповеди, но у нас случилась маленькая проповедь. Я даже рад, когда все это не покладывал. Теперь мы перейдем к вопросам. Я хотел пару коротких вопросов задать, просто поскольку тем, что у меня микрофон в руках. И первый вопрос мой такой, поскольку я как раз прагматик, я отовсюду хочу какой-то выпить. Первый мой вопрос такой, Дэвид. Вы представляете сообщество моральных философов, и внутри этого контента, внутри этого сообщества наверняка есть представление, какой-то консенсус о том, ну хотя бы частично, о том, что хорошо, а что плохо. И существуют ли в нашей жизни, в нашей политике вещи, по части которых публика и моральный философ расходятся больше всего.
What I've been asked is if there's something that, say, philosophers agree on, but the general public would not agree with them. Well, that's a good question. It's a hard question. Honestly, I don't know what the answer is. I think that the philosophical community is a little bit different, but. I was born on a farm, and I went to college late, and I guess I feel a little bit different from the rest of the community of professionals. But maybe I would just say this: if you never actually earned a living, if you've never actually sort of faced unemployment and had to work hard just to get a job at all, if you've never faced that kind of uncertainty, then it seems like people in that category are more inclined to look at the snapshots and not see the process. So they will look at the snapshot and they will say, well, there's people without jobs, so we need to do something about that right now, not tomorrow. It isn't enough that most of the people who don't have jobs today will have them in 6 months, if that's true. Some of them may go bankrupt in the meantime. It's not true. We need not just more of a guarantee than that, but we need to eliminate the time factor in wealth production, say. We need to eliminate the time factor that's involved in earning a living. If you've actually been through it, you know, I've lived, you know, I come from a more than one rich country, and I don't consider myself in any way underprivileged. But, you know, I've lived in circumstances where we didn't have indoor plumbing. I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan, which is behind the rest of North America, the poorest part of North America. And it was no big deal. But if I look back on that now without any experience of it, I would say people shouldn't have to live like that. When I was in it, it was no big deal. And so I would say that you know, people who have experience living through time, maybe suffering through time, let's put it that way, they don't exaggerate the importance of suffering. Whereas people who have never suffered think it's the most unthinkable thing in the world, and so they have a different attitude toward it.
Thank you. Давайте вопросы из зала, давайте только более конкретно. Мне кажется, у нас очень философская дискуссия. Давайте я буду переводить вопросы, потому что...
I've got a practical question. A lot of people who are here are civic activists. So people who are basically trying to change life, not only theirs, and mainly not theirs, but of the people around them. And of course they do this according to their own values, which sets ahead of us a moral question. Do we have a right to decide for other people how to live? Because when you change the world, you change it for some people. If you change it at large scale, you change it for quite a lot of people. So what do moral philosophers say about this? Okay,
there are several parts to that question, so maybe we'll just take it one piece at a time. So one part of what you asked was, do people ever get to make decisions for other people? Yeah, so what do philosophers say about that? Well, if you make decisions for other people, if you decide you're trying to do what's in their best interest, and you just take over and make decisions for them, in philosophy we call that paternalism. It means like presume to take over the role of father figure for them. And so that is, most philosophers have, they think there's something wrong with that, but they also think sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes we do have to treat people like children. So for example, when people are children, so when you have a 5-year-old daughter and it's Christmas and some aunt sends your 5-year-old daughter a check for 10,000 rubles, and the 5-year-old says, well, many, I don't know, what's your favorite candy? How many gumdrops can that buy? And you say, all right, you're going to get sick, but whatever you'll learn, I guess you have to learn somehow that you don't spend all of your money on gumdrops. Okay, now your rich aunt, one of those billionaire aunts that I do like leaves. I'm leaving $1 billion rubles to the 5-year-old, and the 5-year-old says, how many gumdrops does that buy? At that point you say, no, wait a minute. When you're 21, you can decide that, not today. So then you're treating the 5-year-old like a 5-year-old. You're treating the 5-year-old like a child. You're treating the 5-year-old as someone who needs to learn, who needs to grow up, who can't be protected forever. So you let that person make mistakes with 1,000 rubles, or maybe even 10,000 rubles, but at some point you say, you do not get to blow 1 billion rubles. So you treat some people like children, and above all, children. What about adults? You get to treat adults like children? Well, that's a problem if you start doing that. There may still be cases when that is called for, but there is a fundamental arrogance that it's worth a lot to avoid. So, and I don't know about Russia, but certainly we see it all over the United States, which is supposed to be a country of like independent people, very proud and rough, and it's something like that. But the thing is, what am I thinking? If you don't let people learn, make their own mistakes, then they never do grow up. But there are politicians who think people are too stupid to make their own decisions. So, well, I don't understand how you go from that premise, people are too stupid to make their own decisions, to say they should make other people's decisions instead. I don't see the sense in that. And so some of these people will say, well, no, I mean really enlightened folks like me should be making the decisions for stupid people. And I think that's very frightening, because, I mean, I've never met any of those people that struck me as particularly intelligent. I was sitting in an audience once, and I have an American passport now. I think I can say this in public without losing my passport. But I was listening to a talk once, and someone said, well, I'm an advisor to a certain person whose name I won't mention, but he lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And we're like, oh, okay, so he's an advisor to the president. Thank you very much for that. So cute way of bragging about being an advisor to the president. But he said, I did a study, and people can't tell the difference between 1 million and 1 billion. And so I advised the president, or they can't tell the difference between 1 billion and 1 trillion. I said, hey, if you're going to go in debt, you might as well go in debt for 1 trillion. People don't know the difference. And I was sitting in the front row, and I laughed out loud. I thought that was hilarious. And then I stopped. I said, you're serious. Like, you don't know the difference between 1 billion and 1 trillion. You don't think it matters whether we're $1 trillion in debt as opposed to 1 billion. And this was a person with a PhD. This was a person like an advisor to the president. So I don't trust people who think that people are too stupid to make their own decisions. I think those are the absolutely last people that I would want to be making decisions for anybody. I guess I would be okay with them making decisions for themselves. They should not be making decisions for anybody else, I don't think. So that would be my basic reply to that, which is to say, if you take what you want is for people to make mistakes that they can survive and learn from and come back smarter the next time. You want them to make mistakes with 1 bag of gumdrops, not a busload of gumdrops, right? You want them to make small mistakes and learn from them and fall down and skin their knees and get back up and say, well, I'm never doing that again. So, anyone, do you have like electric stove?
Because I was talking about civic activists who basically.
Okay. Okay, so thanks. We can follow up later.
Давайте вопрос из зала всего.
Дэвид, вы упомянули, что убийство разносчика пиццы снижает доверие почтальона. И утилитаристы, если я правильно понял, не умеют это учитывать. Если они это не умеют, поправьте, пожалуйста, умеют они, не умеют это учитывать. Если не умеют, почему они не учитывают снижение стоимости глобальной экономики, снижение доверия, высшие транзакционные издержки, и это снижает стоимость глобальной экономики. And should I translate? Did you understand?
I might have understood. I caught part of that. So look, we have over-specialized. We're studying different things. Sometimes, even if we are studying the same thing, we don't notice that we're studying different things. So if you say, why don't utilitarians grasp, say, global economic principles? There's probably the most famous philosopher in the world today, at least outside of philosophy, and the most famous utilitarian is Peter Singer. And so he used to say, you should give, whenever you can do more good by giving the money away, you should give the money away, which means you should give your money away to starving people to the point where you yourself will be starving. And so that is a utilitarianism without economics. So I've asked him, so what if, say, somebody is throwing babies into a pond and you have to pay $100 to rescue the person, and every time you rescue a baby, some dictator throws another 2 babies into the pond. At some point, is it okay? Is it even permissible to be pulling those babies out, to be throwing $100 bills at the babies and pulling them out? So the point is, incentives matter, but that isn't really the province of philosophy. Peter Singer himself now says that he believes in things like microbanks, institutions that manage small amounts of money and get around the incentive problems. As soon as you start throwing, massive amounts of money at a problem, what you get is the people who get that money are people who want massive amounts of money, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to capture it. So small amounts of money, economic principles tells you you can get that money through to poor people on the ground, but really huge amounts of money never get through. So that's an economic issue, and I should say Peter Singer today he cares about consequences, so he's very aware of it. So he is pulling back and changing his theory. And I still say, okay, that thing you said about giving to the point of marginal disutility, you no longer believe people should act on that principle anymore. So why not say so? Why not announce that the actual point of utilitarianism is not to maximize how much we sacrifice, it's to maximize how much good we do. But in philosophy, we treat the more you sacrifice, the more good you're doing. In economics, we know it's not that simple.
Okay, let's give some attention to the back of the room.
Yes, please. I'm here. Speaking about specific questions, what's your take on what's happening now to the Oscar committee in the States? I mean, speaking about equal opportunities and things like that, can ethics, in your view, be based on racial quotas? And is there a moral limit to political correctness? Thanks.
Gee, that's a really important question, but I don't really even have an opinion on that. I don't know what's going on in all kinds of selection committees. So I guess I would say, if you would have to keep it secret that the award isn't based on merit, then something has gone wrong. So I would say, like, if you say the award is based on merit and nothing else, then it really needs to be based on merit and nothing else. So if you wanted to give like an Oscar for the best black actor, that would be strange, but I wouldn't object if somebody did that. If they wanted to do that, I guess that would be okay. But yeah, I don't think we live in a land of equal opportunity. Certainly not if you take a snapshot. It's things have gotten very, very much better. It's much better than it used to be. And anybody who complains, I mean, if they say this is worse than slavery, they have no idea what they're talking about.
Еще вопросы? Давайте я это равновесие буду вот так делать и буду ваши электронные очереди.
Вот сейчас, пока шла лекция, на Медузе появилась новость о том, что датский парламент решил... Датский парламент, сейчас появилась новость на Медузе, как раз, что датский парламент решил ограничить беженцев и будут отбирать ценности на въезде, и у них может быть сумма только там около 1500 рублей. Понятно, как это работает с точки зрения государства и справедливости, а как мы должны относиться к этому с точки зрения этики.
I don't know anything about that situation. I'm not a journalist. I don't even read newspapers except when I get them on airplanes or something like that. So I'm afraid I don't know anything about that situation. But I know that there are pressing problems with refugees and migrations all over Europe. It's sort of business as usual in the United States for 2 centuries, but places like Germany, they've never had to face anything like that situation anymore, or Northern Europe. So before, so they so yeah, I feel for them, and there's not all problems have solutions, and some of these problems just don't have solutions. So if you have like Australia with 25 million people, should they open their borders? Well, in a way I want to say yes, but they would have 200 million immigrants in a year if they did. So I can understand their not wanting to do that, because I'm not sure that it would be, that Australia would be a worse place if they did that, but they're sure and they're right that it wouldn't be recognizably Australia anymore. It would look completely different. So I don't blame them for being frightened by the prospect. I guess I don't blame Germany either, or Northern Europe, all of these places that are having to deal with the problem. And they're trying to do something, but it's a process, and there are many, many, many millions of people for whom the problem is not going to be solved. And I would say, if you're thinking in practical terms, then I guess you're thinking, how much better can this be a generation from now? Or how much worse can this be 100 years from now? And you don't want to do something today that's going to make things a lot worse 20 years from now or 100 years from now. So you have to think about what you owe to your children, and think about what kind of country they're going to inherit. But the case for doing everything possible for those refugees is absolutely compelling. I don't deny that.
Thank you very much for this lecture, and I would like to ask you about moral dilemma. How far should we interfere? Just for example, there is some fight in the street, and you can protect the victim. Should you interfere or not? It can be this moral dilemma, I think, has any state that fight ISIS. Either you should go into war or not. Yeah? And so how the philosophers solve this problem? Is it moral not to interfere at all and just stand aside? Or it's much more moral to interfere and fight and so take risks and all that stuff? Thank you.
Yeah, so you understand I'm a philosopher and I'm an academic, and these are, my theory is that these questions require real information. You don't start with a theory, you start by actually understanding the problem. And I don't think I do understand that problem, so I have no idea what to say about it, really. It's, you know, we're living in a different kind of world. We're living in a world in which you know, people like neighbors can go completely crazy and they can walk into a shopping center or a football stadium with bombs strapped to themselves. And so the price of being a free society has gone up. It's true, it has. That's all I can say about that.
We have one more question in the room.
Thank you. The moral philosophy is about humanity, and there are quite a lot of ethical questions currently about the technology, like the famous case of driverless cars, which is so discussed right now. So their question is, what shall we do with the car facing the pedestrian crossing the road, and should it kill the passenger or should it kill the pedestrian? So people do not operate with algorithms, but cars operate like machines do. So should we ban the technology until we find the other way to solve this problem, to save hope?
That's a great question. I haven't thought about it, but I will think about it. That does sound like the sort of question that I don't know that I should have an answer to it, but I should pretend to have an answer to it, and I should torture my students with questions like that. So I will. I would just say this, that there are fundamental principles of business, which is to say, you don't operate on the premise that you have to guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen. So, say there's a drug called thalidomide that in the 1950s was used as a painkiller, I think, and especially for menstruation pain. But the thing is, it was found to have to be really good for the symptoms of cramping in pregnancy too. So it was prescribed for thousands and thousands of pregnant women. But so here's the thing, that the tests of the drug, for the safety of the drug, weren't done on women. And to this day, incidentally, drug tests are done on men, generally not women, like prisoners and things like that, generally not women. And so women are actually at terrible risk for ordinary drugs, like even things like acetaminophen, like your just basic your headache. You know, it's like it's done on men, and men aren't the same hormonally, and they're also just bigger. So the recommended dosage is the recommended dosage for a man, not a woman. And that's a sort of pharmacological disaster. But if you go back to thalidomide, and now people are starting to prescribe thalidomide again. And that's interesting. It turns out it's good for various, maybe good for Alzheimer's, but if I remember correctly. But so you try that drug, and there's got to be some kind of understanding. People who take that drug have to realize they're taking a real risk, and the people selling the drug have to share the risk. They don't have to, no side should be taking all of the risk themselves, I don't think, but they do have to share the risk. They have to acknowledge we are in the realm of imperfect knowledge here. And it doesn't matter how many clinical trials we do with rats and things. We're not really going to find out how this works and what its side effects are until people start dying. And we have to say, I'm sorry, we're going to pay for that. And so progress gets made by people learning from mistakes. And so I say that the ideal society is a society that keeps the scale of mistakes down. So I would say, I don't know what to do. If I were passing laws, I really don't know what I would do. But you could see, you could imagine the idea of like when you get a license to sell this drug, like, well, we do have to warn people about all the side effects, that's appropriate. But you could say, your first batch of customers shouldn't be 10 million people. I mean, your first batch of customers should be a clinical-sized trial. And, you know, realizing you maybe, if you do end up killing people, you should be paying them their estates millions of dollars. And I imagine the driverless cars would be like that too. If you have an algorithm that turns out to be homicidal, then you say, all right, if I didn't know, that's one thing. If I knew that my technology was going to kill people and I covered it up, then I should be in jail. That's criminal, I should go to jail. But if I didn't know, if nobody could reasonably have known, you had to do the experiment to find out, then I say, well, everybody involved in the experiment should know the risks. And if they know the risks, that's how we make progress. I mean, we live in a cave if we can't do that.
Before I ask a question, I would like to read you one quotation of second president of the United States of America, John Adams. The only foundation of a free constitution is a pure virtue, and if this cannot be inspired into our people in a greater measure than they have it now, they may change their rulers and the forms of government, but they will not obtain a lasting liberty. They will only exchange tyrants and tyrannies. I would like to ask you, what do you think? Can we say that ethics, virtue, values, and moral are the foundation of law, of state, of constitution? What do you think about it?
I agree with that, and I think the Scottish Enlightenment was happening during this time, and it was a big influence on Adams and Jefferson and a number of Ben Franklin, a number of other of the American founders. So their philosophy was they paid close attention to these folks like Adam Smith and David Hume, and rightly so. And David Hume in particular, Adam Smith in particular, really had some kind of a theory of virtue. So which is what you're talking about. So I said there are two main families of ethical theories. One would be the consequentialist theories and the deontological theories. If you're teaching an ethics class, you say there are three main theories, and then the third theory is the one that you believe in. But so often when people say, and here's the third theory, what they'll be talking about is really almost like it's a different topic, it's a different subject matter. So you say, okay, the consequentialist theories say the right action is the one that promotes the good. The deontological theories say the right action is the one that respects the good. And then the virtue theorists say the right action is the wrong question. That's not the question you want to ask. What you want to ask is, what kind of a person would do that? Or what kind of a person do you want to be? What kind of a person is it worth being? So
I'm talking about the basis. Should the values and virtue be the basis, the foundation of state, of law, of liberty, of civil society?
So I would say no, but I would say virtue should be the objective of the civil society. So if you say the fundamental law is that everyone has to be virtuous, say, John Adams didn't believe that, but he did believe something like we should have a culture that celebrates virtue. We should have a culture that expects virtue, that expects nobility, that expects heroism, and we should have a legal system that expects it as well. But you expect it by trusting people to be that. You don't expect it by saying we're going to punish you if you don't do this. The way you expect it is to say we take for granted that you can be trusted with liberty. That's what I would be
Спасибо, спасибо большое. Давайте потом, после описания части мало времени осталось, еще два вопроса у нас на очереди.
Thank you for your speech. So I have a more general question connected to your example about the people from ex-Soviet Union, the philosophers. So can you give us more bright examples how people from different societies tackle the same moral questions?
How people from different societies.
So how they perceive how they answer the same moral questions. So let's say people from Asia or Europe, or Eurasia or US. So I mean, different societies, probably different time frame.
Okay, I guess I'll just say one quick thing, and it's a big question, but I'll just say one big thing that I notice is how important social pressure is. What you think you should do in most societies, every society that I know, has a lot to do with what you think other people expect of you. So you can have societies at particular times, right? So if you say, all right, I'm not asking for a lot here. All I'm asking is for Jewish people have to wear a yellow ribbon. That's all I'm asking. It's no big deal. And you look around and you say, that is really scary. Something very dangerous is going on. Yeah, it's just a yellow ribbon, but I'm scared of what's happening here. And you look around, and everybody else is kind of looking around. Everybody else, they're looking around, and they're saying, everybody else is looking around. Nobody else is complaining, right? And so you don't do anything, and that's how you become a tyranny. And this thing, this is a historical event that happens in a particular place at a particular time. It doesn't happen everywhere. I don't, the human genome isn't different enough, I think, for there to be biological reasons why there would be different ethics in different places. I think it's kind of historical fluke, and it depends upon just the political tides of a certain moment. But yeah, those are different from one place to another, but it all can change.
И еще один последний, вот тоже там.
Спасибо. У меня такой вопрос. Вы сравнили в какой-то момент мораль с игрой в шахматы, что нет идеальной стратегии, чтобы выиграть шахматную партию. Однако мы смогли создать программу, которая выигрывает гроссмейстеров. И у меня вопрос, можем ли мы создать систему алгоритмизации морали? Можем ли мы ее выстроить в каком-то порядке, чтобы сделать программу, которая могла бы решать моральные вопросы, ну и, может быть, была бы в каком-то плане каких-то высших арбитров в случае необходимости? И насколько это уже было бы морально передавать решение некой программе, которая находится над людьми, потому что она принимает всегда идеально правильные моральные решения? Спасибо.
Well, that's I don't know what the potentials are for robotics or artificial intelligence. I'm very surprised that that programs capable of beating the best human chess players were invented. So I wouldn't have expected that, just because I would have thought, humans don't play chess by that kind of crude computation, whereas I guess they've got software now. Basically, it plays out. You take a play and every possible response to that play, and that quickly becomes, I would have thought, computationally impossible. But apparently, they've got software so powerful that it can do that, and it can that's a stupid way to play chess, but they've got software with so much computational power that it can do it. So as to what would it be like for a computer to engage in ethical reflection, I can't imagine that at all. I can't imagine who would know how to program a thing like that, even if you had all the computation. Like if you had all of the electrons in the universe at your disposal for powering the machine, I still don't know what it would be like to program a machine to think ethically. I guess I don't know enough about what ethics is. So I can't tell you it's never going to happen. It's not. Your question was clear, but I still don't understand it. I don't know well. I don't understand it well enough to have any idea what computers might be able to do to answer it years from now. Like that, computers may switch to a whole different kind of information processing, a whole different kind of reasoning, more like what humans do. I've heard arguments that actually is impossible, but I don't know.
Thank you. That is all. Thank you. Давайте закругляться, потому что, кажется, лежит наши пределы, во-вторых, уже поздно, а в-третьих, может быть, какие-то вопросы вы сможете задать кулуарным способом, закончится. А я хотел бы вам сказать, что это первая лекция в серии, вторая лекция будет через 3 недели, чуть больше, по-четвертому, параллельно, прочитает Элла Панияк. Это будет социолог замечательный петербургский. Это будет единственная дескриптивная лекция. Она будет относиться к тому, что называется дескриптивной этикой в этой дисциплине. И Элла будет рассказывать о том, как соотносятся ценности наших сограждан и их поведение. Довольно должно быть интересно. Вот. Приходите, пожалуйста, и спасибо за сегодня. И да, спасибо большое.
Переведу его ссылку. Да. А задать его я не
Я вот в том-то и вопрос. Не работало, что ли? Аудио и... А в GoPro